Okay, well, it's 10:30, so I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. The name of this talk is Transforming Developers into Security People. And my name is Chris Romeo, and just a little bit about me. I actually live in Raleigh, North Carolina, in the United States. And so I'm the CEO and co-founder of my own company called Security Journey. And I've been involved in the world of security for 20 years at this point. And I like to think I've been doing security since before it was cool, because security has kind of become the new hot thing right now. Everybody's paying attention to it. When I first started, nobody even knew what we were talking about, and we were all focused on what the government was doing, and that's where a lot of my experience began. I spent 10 years at Cisco Systems and being part of the central security team there. That's where I learned a lot about teaching developers about security, because I was responsible for teaching 25,000 of them, which, if you want to talk about a problem at scale, teaching one developer about security is difficult. Teaching 25,000 is a whole other level of challenge. I have a podcast if you're interested in things about application security. It's called the Application Security Podcast. Not a very inventive name, but it describes kind of what we talk about. We talk a lot about security culture and about developers and security and the different issues and things that we face. I'm also a part of the OWASP organization, Open Web Application Security Project. They got lots of great resources. I'll mention some of their stuff that's out there today. So just to help me kind of figure out who's in the room here, so who has a primary role of developer, directly as a developer? Okay, maybe half. All right, so C and C++? Okay, most everybody. All right. How about any web programmers? Okay, a couple floating around. All right. And then the rest of the folks, you're kind of coming, any people that are security people? Like kind of, okay, all right, that kind of fills out the room. All right, great. So here's what I'm going to talk about today as far as kind of an agenda. So I'll talk first about why or how security does or doesn't matter to developers today, kind of both from an individual perspective and also from when you're looking at a whole big, large organization of developers. Talk about why security is seen as a challenge. I did a little bit of research into this area. I'll share that with you. And that comes out in the 4 developer responses to security. And then after that, I'll talk about how I think we solve this problem, both as individuals and as groups of developers working together. So, does anybody know the famous philosopher who coined this phrase, software's eating the world? Very famous philosopher from what century are we in now? I guess he'd be from the last century, from the 21st century. Mark Andreessen, the famed venture capitalist, and was involved in Netscape and a number of other things. He actually coined this term a few years ago, and it still kind of sticks, because if you think about it, and what Bjorn was talking about this morning in the keynote with embedded systems and everything, software's in everything. We know this. We're developers. We're writing things. We're writing that software. I kind of liked how, I don't know this guy, Alexei Shipilev. I have no idea who he is or where he's from, but I really thought his explanation here really captured why we need to care so much about security. So when software's eating the world, it becomes the developer's social responsibility to write correct, maintainable, and understandable code. I'd add secure on top of that. I just wish he would have added a little bit of space there for secure code as well to fit into that. But we know that software is kind of where it's at right now, and security is something that we need to add into that. So when I think about a developer in general, I think about in regards to what drives you as a developer. And so I say the average developer. I mean that to say when I think big, when I was working at Cisco, about 25,000 people, I had to kind of create an idea in my mind of the average developer, because I couldn't necessarily cater to each individual person. And so I started to think about, well, what kind of drives most organizations for that average developer? Well, the age-old, you can have 2 out of 3, good, fast, cheap. I put good and secure together. I kind of think about that as how you're approaching it as a developer. The goals that you're working towards, well, first of all, is going to be on-time delivery. That's always going to be the most crucial thing that's being driven organizationally from your management chain, from your executives on down. It's all about Did we meet our software release date? Did things happen the way they were supposed to? Are we creating code that's bug-free or as close to bug-free as possible? Is it on budget? Is it on time? Feature complete? And so when I come in and start talking to large groups of developers, I hear a number of different objections to why we can't do application security or we can't do security in general. And so I think these are all myths, but I'll share them with you just in case these are things that you've heard other people say or maybe even considered yourself. So one of the first big objections that I hear is security. It takes too many resources. It slows us down. We can't. It's going to make our process be so slow that we can't ever get anything done. And so this is kind of the objection that security is just not fast enough for the environment we work in. You know, we're in a DevOps environment and we ship code 50 times a day, and security just can't fit into that piece. And so I guess my answer to that is, you know, you can build security in, or you can bolt it on at the end. It's your choice. You know, it's pay me now or pay me later is how security actually works. You can pay up front in small installments, or you can pay a large amount at the end. It's your choice. And what I mean by that is if you wait till the end and you leave a bunch of security bugs and they're in the software right before the release, you're going to have to either slow down the release or you're going to have to scramble at the last minute to try to fix those problems. And so that's kind of the objection from a speed perspective. I've also heard people say, well, you know, our methodology doesn't support security. So Agile, Waterfall, DevOps, Kanban, you know, whatever other methodology you can imagine, somebody will tell me, oh, no, that security doesn't work in this. And my answer to that is security works in everything across. It doesn't matter what methodology you're using. The things I'm going to talk about later in this presentation are applicable to any methodology that you have. And then the other thing is that I've heard this from a lot of developers, and maybe you've experienced this yourself, but developers sometimes they see security as the department of no. And what I mean by that is every time they go to security, they're like, hey, I got this really cool idea. We're going to do this really cool thing. And what does security say? No, we can't do that. That's insecure. That's not going to work. And so the answer to that is you have to say no, comma, but let's work together and design. As a security person working with a developer, I have to say no, but let's figure out how we can change the design a little bit so that it'll be secure. It's an awesome feature. It's a great idea, and so that's part of our objections as well. You'll also hear people say, "Well, we already have a security department. That's that group that sits down the hall here that we all try to avoid because they tell us no all the time." And so this is actually a pretty big myth. And BSIM is a consortium of different organizations that take software security very seriously, and they all get together and have conferences. But they do this. This kind of survey of all these companies that take software security seriously. And what they found is that on average, this is for a company that takes software security seriously, they have 1.61 security people for every 100 developers inside an organization. And this is the people who are serious enough to go to a conference and pay a lot of money to take part in this mass survey. So that tells me that number it's a lot lower. There's a lot less security people, a lot more developers per security person in just normal companies that aren't members of BSIM. I don't know what that number is, but is it 200? Is it 500? I don't know. But the less so this myth that we have a security department that does security, it just starts to break down when we look at this problem at scale. And this means that every developer has to have a focus on security. You can't just say it's the security department that has to do it. So here's where I find kind of the state of developer security or developers' knowledge of security. And so I find with a lot of developers that there's just a lack of understanding or lack of even awareness of what the problem space looks like. Why is this even a problem for us? Nobody's ever shown them what happens when a buffer overflow is exploited in the code that they write. They don't have that perspective. And so another thing is, I would say something that I call security IQ, the idea that how much do they actually know about the fundamentals and even maybe some of the more advanced principles. I find that most developers, they just don't have that foundation because, and I'm not blaming the developers or anything. I'm just saying here's where we are in the problem space. And you think about it though, if you think back to your university experience, if you did a computer science degree, if you had a course in security, I'd be almost willing to bet I can tell you what it covered. Network security. Because that's still what we teach in the undergrad programs for computer science. When you take and a lot of universities have gotten better now, but I went to school a long time ago and there wasn't even security classes that existed at that point. But the last point about the developers and kind of the state of where we are, developers really are the first line of defense when building any type of security efforts or making any type of security change. Because they're close to the code, they're immediately involved in it, and so we just have to remember that they're the first line of defense. So you might hear everything I've said so far and go, wow, this guy just came here to pick on developers and say that they're not doing the right stuff or whatever. And so I say all that to say, I don't think that developers are monsters. That's not what I'm trying to say. I think that developers want to do the right thing when somebody actually tells them or makes it clear, here's what we're supposed to do from a security perspective. Now, I will admit sometimes developers can be stubborn as a population, and I think everybody in this room is going to agree with me with that. Nobody's going to be like, oh no, developers, they just always collaborate perfectly and get along. But so there can be some amount of stubbornness, I guess, that goes into kind of trying to change security. So here's what my goal is when I start thinking about transforming developers into security people. So I want to get to the point where developers, I have a group of developers that think like security people. And I crossed out hackers there on purpose. Because everybody in the security industry, everybody's focus is on the offensive side of security. How do we break stuff? How do we find the next exploit? How do we demonstrate our elite skills in hacking whatever it is we're looking at? And so about 95% of the industry focuses on the offensive side and 5% on the defensive side. The developers sit on the defensive side though. And so that's part of what we have to change as an industry is we have to say, okay, how do we get more focused on defense instead of so much on offense? And that's why I crossed out that idea of hackers. I don't really want developers to think like hackers. I don't want developers to sit there and go, ooh, how am I going to write the next greatest exploit against my neighbor's code here just that they're having me take a look at? I want you to think like a security person. I want you to understand risk and threat and those kind of basic things and step back to the left a little bit in our overall approach. So when I think about a security person and what defines the security person's mindset, here's a couple of things that I'm trying to connect with an individual developer. So first of all, I've talked about foundational knowledge a couple of times. I mean, this is just the basic things that I want the security person to know about, or the developer to know about security. Second thing is I want developers to understand at least the basics of the attacks against the languages that they're working in. So if you're working in C and C++, you should know what a buffer overflow is. You should understand what's happening. You probably do understand what's happening. You should actually play around with buffer overflows a little bit and see kind of what some of the challenges are there. You should go further back into looking at the cause of some of those buffer overflows, like stir copies and things like that with unchecked buffers, and where do those error conditions that result in buffer overflow actually come from. Third piece of the security person mindset is developers have to acknowledge that whatever you're writing today will come under attack tomorrow, if not today. As soon as you release your code out in some type of product, somebody somewhere is attacking it. It doesn't matter what you make. If it's something that somebody can buy or access over the internet, it takes seconds from a new release of code in a web application being deployed before the first scans are coming at it from other countries around the world, for example. And so that's just a reality, but developers because it changes how you think about approaching security when you realize this code I just wrote will be under attack very shortly. It gives you a more heightened focus and awareness. And then tools and processes are always going to be a part of what we do. I don't think that needs to be the primary thing, but there certainly are a lot of tools that we can use to make security easier for developers and also processes along the way. So another thing that I like to think about, I actually borrowed this idea from a guy named Simon Sinek who wrote this book, Start With Why. I think one of the reasons developers are put off by the security department is, as a security people, we like to run up to developers and we like to start talking about what you need to do and how you need to do it. And the challenge there is we never explain to you why you need to do these things. And when you don't know why, the what and the how don't really make sense. And this is a general, I mean, Simon Sinek wasn't writing about code or developers or anything. He's just writing in general about this concept. But it's all about, let's explain to a developer why you need to care about security, about buffer overflows, before we start talking about how you're going to do better, use stir copy better so that you have some type of, you're checking your input, for example, before you start passing strings around and things. So really where this kind of lands here is that this is a people problem that I'm talking about here. This isn't a technology problem. It's about changing the mindset within individuals about how they approach security as developers. And I really, truly believe that developers are the key in any organization. And that's why I do what I do, is in working with developers and looking for ways to teach, just like this, more about security. So I came up with 4 different answers to why developers don't focus on security or say that they can't do something from the security perspective. So there's the unfamiliar, they just didn't know. Overworked, I just can't fit it into what I'm doing. Apathetic, I just don't care. And then there is a 4th group, those that are already gung-ho about security and are interested in looking about how they can learn more, apply more, teach people around them, do all those types of things. So a number of these quotes are from actual people who I posed this question to over the last number of years, as well as from a number of my colleagues across the internet from lots of different companies and things. I posed this question to a number of friends of mine in the industry. What are some of the best excuses that you've heard when you sit down across from developers and ask them, so why don't you think we can do something from a security perspective? And so this first group is the unfamiliar or uneducated kind of answer. That first one is a direct quote. Obviously, I removed all names to protect the innocent or guilty, depending on how you look at these types of quotes. The first one, is that start with why problem. That person just alluded. I mean, they put that right into their explanation. They said, why do we even need to do security? Like, nobody had ever stopped to explain to that person why they needed to do it. And then 2, don't understand, don't know what to do. 3, the third one there kind of pained me a little bit. Like, when I hear somebody say that, like, oh, we're small, no one would ever come after us. It's like, oh, are you selling the product? Are you putting it on the internet? Doesn't matter how big you are. Someone is coming after you. And I don't mean to sound paranoid, but that's the reality. That's the truth of how the modern internet and modern products work today. I love number 4. Security causes change, and change is too risky for our applications. I was like, I wish I knew what company that came from so I could never use their services again or buy their products, because if change is going to cause their stuff to break, just regular change, I don't even want to know how bad their security is. So when I think of these foundational lessons, here's a couple of things that I think you need to include, that you need to ensure every developer in your organization has access to these basic foundational things. So I always start with security fundamentals. Security fundamentals is just basic security vocabulary. And almost everybody I've ever talked to, before they start kind of going through and learning this stuff, they're like, oh, I already know that. I don't need to know that. And then they get to the end of going through some type of a training and they're like, oh, I didn't know those things. I thought I knew what a threat was. I thought I knew what an exploit, vulnerability. But then you kind of cemented it for me from a definition perspective. And just that first concept alone can really start to change how a whole organization approaches security. As soon as there's a shared common vocabulary, then security starts to become something you can talk about in daily stand-ups quickly, if there's a particular issue. Attacks and attackers, who are the people out there? What are they doing to come after us? Simple secure development lifecycle. So for those if you don't know or don't have one of these, a secure development lifecycle is just it's basically a process that you layer on top of your methodology that includes some standard security pieces, some standard things you can do for security along the way. I love to do security myths because it's more like a myth buster type of thing, and we've already looked at some of those here. Privacy and customer data protection. I mean, privacy, all you got to tell people now is GDPR, and all the lawyers pop up and they start, inside of a company. But I mean, with GDPR, privacy is first priority for everybody in any organization now, and I'm sure some of you have had experience with that already. And then security business case just comes down to what's the return on investment for what we're doing here? Like if you run a static analysis tool and you spend the time going through the results, what are we getting out of that? What's the benefit for you as a developer? And then the other thing that I think about is I want those that are uneducated or unaware, I want to build this culture where everyone is a security person. When I walk into a room of developers, when I say, who's a security person here, even though they spend 99% of their time writing code, I want them all to put their hand up and say, I'm a security person. And I don't mean that everybody's transferring to the security department or everybody's going to stop writing code and just work on, deploying security tools or something. What I mean is everybody is going to apply security to what they do in their job. So if they're a C programmer or C++ programmer, they're going to apply security into how they approach writing code every day. They're going to say, here's my responsibility, here's my piece of what I need to do. A little bit of an intermediate set of lessons that you can look at here. Now, granted, OWASP is focused on the Open Web Application Security Project. It's focused on web applications, but they've got this document called the Proactive Controls. And I guess my argument for you here is that a couple of these are very specific to web apps, but a number of these are applicable to any language that you're writing in. I mean, define security requirements, that's part of everything that we need to do. And so just by the way, this is actually a document, it's about 15 pages or 20 pages long, that it is, I like to think of it as, if I could get every developer to know 10 things about security, this would be what it would be, this list of 10. And if you're a C and C++ programmer, you can basically, maybe you can't throw away secure database access. I guess you access databases to some degree as a C and C++ programmer, so you could technically have a SQL injection sneak into your C code. Somehow, it's possible. I've been curious about this for a long time. Is anybody in here a C or C++ programmer that's writing web apps in that language? Oh, man, I'm going to talk to you after. I'm just fascinated by I'm waiting to find somebody that like somebody's got to be writing web apps in C. It's the coolest thing. But yeah, check out this Proactive Controls. Nice thing about OWASP is everything they do is free. It's all open source, so you can go look at these documents. But you'll see, especially if you're a C and C++ programmer, C4 encoding and escaping data on output, C5 validating all inputs. I mean, these are things that apply to you. Third-party software, handling errors and exceptions like Bjorn was talking about this morning. So this is a great resource to take a look at. Okay, second group are those people that are overworked. So these are the people these are the direct quotes I've heard from that group. Too much other work to do. My boss doesn't give me time for security. Security is an unfunded mandate. Isn't that terrible? Doesn't that kind of gives you a little bit of cringe of pain, like, ooh, unfunded mandate. It means work I have to do that we don't have resources allocated for. That's executive speak for something, but I'll leave that alone for now. We don't have time to build insecurity. So these are direct quotes from some people that fall into that overworked category. And so the answer for the overworked is we have to automate anything that we possibly can. We have to take application security, and if anything we can do to build it into our build pipelines and things, we have to do that. Static analysis, for example, is something that is just a no-brainer that should exist in any build pipeline. But the challenge with that is if you run static analysis, sometimes you'll get a 10,000-page report. And I don't know about you, but I've never had time to read a 10,000-page report. I'm not going to probably look at a 10-page report. They give me a 1-page report, now we're talking. But 10,000 pages, that's going to go in the bin right away. So you automate static analysis by taking static analysis and putting it into your IDE as a developer. So a couple different vendors out there now have solutions. They're starting to make the static analysis operate inside of your IDE so that it becomes like a spell checker for your code. So that as you're making those problems, it can go and pop up a little red box next to your code real time, which I know as a developer, there's nothing worse than pushing a feature into a release, it gets something caught in static analysis, and 2 weeks later they send you an update. Now what have you been doing in the 2 weeks since then? Working on other cool stuff and slowly letting all the things about that feature drift out of your brain. Now you got to re-queue, go back, trying to figure out what the heck was I doing here to start out with. So automation and simplify, you bring static analysis into the IDE, it can alert you right in real time while you're working on your code. And then I think to deal with that kind of the objection where somebody said, hey, the executives, it's an unfunded mandate. I mean, I think there's a certain amount of management and executive awareness that needs to happen. I tend to approach security culture change as a bottom-up type of perspective. That's just how I approach the world. Like, I don't really want to talk to executives much, so I'd rather work with folks on the ground and kind of start a movement so that then the executives will have to be kind of looking down and say, oh, look, there's something happening here. And then they kind of get on board with what you're doing. But the other way to do that is to interact with them and get some buy-in from why are people saying security is an unfunded mandate? Like, if you want security, if it's important to us as an organization, then you need to give us resources to do it. Okay, how about this is the apathetic, the complacent, and ultimately the know-it-all. Because, with motivation, it's not that I'm lazy, it's just that I don't care. And so some people, actually have this. It's too hard, sounds really complicated, somebody else's problem, we have nothing worth protecting. That's another one that pains me. Oh, no, you do. You have things that are worth protecting. We've always done things this way. Oh, man, that's a punishing one, too. And then I already know all this stuff, which I think number 5 is probably the most dangerous out of any of those responses. When someone, oh, I know this already. Maybe they do. So I tend to approach that group with first some shock value. So Equifax was a big deal. It's a big deal anywhere, but really big deal in the United States where, as it turns out, every American citizen's PII, personally identifiable information, was released as a result of the Equifax breach. Nice thing about that is, for a few months, it had everybody's attention. So if you mentioned that, people would be like, oh yeah, we don't want that to happen to us. Like, do you want to be the next Equifax? Was a phrase that was thrown out for those people that said, I just don't care about this. And that caused that amount of shock value. I mean, you look at, IBM's got this great study, the cost of data breach. They just updated for 2018. Average cost of a data breach, almost $4 million. So you think about that in the perspective of whatever your product is, whatever you're selling, the company that you work for, whatever you do, that's an average number. I mean, Equifax was a lot more than that. But I learned something from, so a guy named Brad Arkin is the chief security officer at Adobe. And so I kind of borrowed this idea of shock value for him. He has this idea of never waste a good incident. So if you remember, Adobe didn't used to be known for its stellar security. Still not known for stellar security, but they've come a long way by throwing away Flash. But that's a whole other discussion for another day. But Adobe's security team used to be really tiny, and when they started to have all those vulnerabilities come out in Flash and Acrobat and everything, Brad Arkin, actually the guy who said never waste a good incident, he started taking advantage of that because executives, what happens when there's a big vulnerability released against your product? Executives get all crazy for a week or two. Like, ooh, we got this problem, everybody, all hands, we're having what they call it, that meeting where they bring everybody, like 100 people in there and nothing really gets done, but everybody's frantic and running around. So during that time, though, is when you can really take a big leap because you got everybody's attention, all eyes are focusing. So he just never waste a good incident was advice I carried forth from him. And then this I'm going to tell you honestly, I'm the anti-compliance person. So this really pains me. Like, trying to get somebody to do something by telling them you have to or else, especially with developers, is just a painful thing. But the catch is, there is some population of a development organization that is never going to do anything like from a security perspective. I mean, even if it's a mandate, even if there's threats, there's always going to be some group. But compliance saying you have to do this or else will catch some of the people that were kind of hanging on saying we're not doing it along the way. And so, it's painful, but it is what it is. The last one is the people that are gung-ho. So these are the people that answer back with, where do we learn more? Who can mentor me? I want to go into security as a job for the future. How do I make this happen? And so kind of how we channel what they're doing is, I'm a big believer in this idea of security community. And you can do this within a developer community as well. And the idea here is it can be something as simple as saying, you know what, once a month, let's just have a lunchtime session where we get some pizza and somebody from our development team gets up and talks about something security related that's happened to them. And maybe they share some code, they share some examples. Now we've started to get some shared experiences going back and forth across different developers, and we're able to kind of have, you know, just a better kind of growth and network that happens there within that organization. So I mean, it can happen, and as it grows, it can become something bigger, like monthly training turns into doing a full day conference and capture the flags and bigger conferences and things. And a lot of bigger organizations are doing this very strategically and structurally, but my takeaway for you here is that this is something you don't even have to do. You don't have to be so formal and, you know, have official names and everything. You can just schedule a lunchtime meeting and say, let's talk about how to write code better in a more secure fashion. So I guess now thinking on from your perspective, who finds other people around them answering the question of why can't we do security with one of those kind of unfamiliar answers? Okay. How about the gung-ho perspective? Who kind of finds people around them that are just gung-ho about security at this point? A little bit? Okay. How about apathetic? Those people like, I don't care. This is dumb. And then how about overworked? Okay. Yeah. It's almost like I knew that was going to be the answer. I think so. Yeah. I mean, I've heard that same answer. Overworked is the most popular one. Every audience I've ever talked to about this, because and so that tells me that's the common theme, is that everybody is overworked and being asked to develop more features and more code, and they're not being given time to prioritize security into what they're doing. So now we kind of transition from the problem space into what are some things that we can actually do about this. And so this will apply to you as an individual. It can apply to things you can apply to your team or even to your entire organization across the board. And so when I think about a security behavior, so let's stop and define that here for a second, because when I say security behavior, this is something that we can teach people to do that will ultimately decrease danger, take away risk, take away mitigate some type of a threat that we have. But it's got to be a behavior, because behaviors are what defines what you do when nobody's watching. Like if you teach somebody, kind of change the way they approach the world when it comes to secure coding, so that you're not using something like stir copy anymore at all. If you change the way people think, so that when they're starting to think, how am I going to move these two values back and forth, and they think, oh, stir copy, but wait, I don't use stir copy. That's a security behavior change that's happened. And that's so much bigger than any tool or anything else that we can do along the way. So when I think of a security behavior, there's a couple conditions that have to fit here. One is it has to be lightweight. Okay? It can't be a 100-page process document. Nobody's ever going to look at that. That's going to be useless. It has to be lightweight. It has to be very well defined, start and end. Here's what we're doing. You have to understand why. Why would I want to do that? Why would I care? And what's the return on investment? And then it has to be repeatable. So two people do it, we should come up with a similar result, probably not exact. We never want to say we're going to have an exact result, but we should have a similar result if two people do this same activity at the same time or same way. So what is a security behavior not? It's not a process. Okay, and I'm going to kind of stop and camp out on this for a second, because a lot of times people think, oh, well, we can just create a process for security, and then everybody will execute the process, and then we'll get to the end of the day and we'll have no vulnerabilities. And process has its own challenges, because different people provide different levels of rigor to the process. Some are like, ooh, this is the way we have to do it, and we followed all 20 steps. Some are like, I'll do step 1 and 20, and we'll call it good along the way. So that's why this is bigger. A security behavior is bigger than a set of steps or process. It's more about how do we change the way people think. And so that's the idea of when you think about these security behaviors. I've got a number of them I'm going to describe for you here that I think are important for all developers to know. But when you think about these security developer behaviors, it's really mindset and then adding some skills. Then we get into this idea of security habits. Now, a security habit is something where every time you sit down, you do it this way. Like you always run static analysis on code when you check it in. You always request a code review from a peer that's looking at it from a security perspective. These are all things that become habits along the way. So security learning, I mean, this is just habit that we want to build where developers are constantly learning more and getting more in depth about the different topics of security. There's lots of different ways they can do that. There's a lot of different resources available on the internet. You can do things where individuals that have gone a little further can teach others inside of your organization. The second one is experiencing security. So at least on the web app front, unfortunately on the C and C++ world, I just haven't seen a good example of this. But in the web app front, OWASP actually has 3 different projects that are vulnerable web applications. And so what that means is somebody has gone through and added, on purpose, SQL injection, cross-site scripting, insecure deserialization, XML injection style attacks, file upload problems, open redirects, like every problem you could ever have in a web application, they built them in on purpose. And the idea is let developers actually experience a SQL injection from the other side of the table. So instead of looking at it in a code example, go actually exploit a SQL injection, get access to the system like an attacker would, dump information from a database and go, ooh, now I see how that actually works. Because then when you're looking at your own code, you've kind of gone full circle. You've seen what happens when somebody exploits that vulnerability, and you come back around. So 3 different tools that exist out here right now for experiencing. WebGoat is the ancient one that's been around for like 12 years. They just did a big overhaul of it, so it's decent. JuiceScript, that should say, yeah, that's JuiceScript. It is JavaScript based, but the tool is JuiceScript, JuiceShop. Nice thing about JuiceShop is it's been written in the last couple of years. It's all written in Node, so it's server-side Node. And they have like every vulnerability class you could think of. And what they did is it looks like a storefront. It looks like a storefront that's selling juice. And so you're actually interacting. It has a membership. It has, stores, fake credit cards. It does all kinds of things that look like a real live application. So, and the last one here is if you're looking at DevOps and the world of microservices and things, there's a new project called DevSlop. I know it's not a great name, but it's basically a sloppy DevOps architecture with microservices riddled with vulnerabilities. And so it's taking this idea of something that's broken that you can play around with and test to the whole next generation of the way software is being done on the web. So experiencing security is a big deal here. Security community, participating in that is a habit that you want to instill in teams. That tends to connect with the apathetic and the gung-ho, because for the apathetic, you're giving them a place to go and talk and maybe even complain about things that they're dealing with in security and kind of having people help them along the way. Planning resources is another big one that's on the overworked side. And so that's one that kind of drifts to executives and people that can make those type of decisions. That's not really an individual developer type of solution. Okay, this is one of my favorites, and this is the idea of threat modeling. And so I put this down as something for the gung-ho, but it's something that you really want to get every developer to have an understanding for. Is anybody in here familiar with threat modeling? Okay, good, about half the room, awesome. So threat modeling is the idea where we take a design and we draw a picture of it and we attack it before we ever write any code. And what that does for us is it allows us to identify weaknesses in the design that would have been manifested in the code and fix them on paper before we start writing the code. Now, I'm a realist, and I know that the way code works these days and the way development works is nothing's ever that straightforward. Like, oh, now we're going to have our design phase for the next 3 months. Like, this isn't the 1970s. This is, 2018, so things are moving faster than that. But in concept, the idea is, let's take a look at this design or what we implemented, and let's pick it apart, finding all the security problems in the design, so then we can go back and mitigate them. I'm actually doing another talk tomorrow here at TechTown where I'm actually going to spend a few minutes introducing threat modeling, and then we're actually going to get a bunch of whiteboards and let people start tearing up and actually doing some threat modeling in real time. Security code review. So everybody probably does code review here. I guess my question is, how many people do security code review? Okay, just a couple hands are going up here. And so when I think of security code review, you're using all the same skills you already do. It's just layering some of that knowledge on top so that you can find buffer overflows, for example. You can see places where that type of a challenge might be coming in. You can hyper-focus on input validation. when you're looking at the code that's been written. Are we taking, where's this input coming from? Is it untrusted? If it's untrusted, we got to scrutinize this little piece of code because it better be clean, because that dirty input's coming from the internet somewhere or some other place, and we got to make sure that we're doing the proper checking on that before it goes in. So yeah, security code review is another big one here. Two more. So this idea of red teaming, this is the whole idea of teaching developers to be mean to your code. And so what I mean by that is developers should know enough about breaking, they should know enough about that offensive side of the world to be able to at least try to break something they've written or try to break something that somebody else, a peer, has written that they're doing a code review on or something. And so it takes a certain set of skills to be able to break stuff. So I'm not asking for every developer to become a penetration tester that can hack the planet and everything else on it. I'm just saying you got to learn enough about some of the basic things that happen in penetration testing to be able to try out some of those things. And you never know what you might find. And the last one is responding to security problems. So that's another behavior in that it's driven somewhat by process inside your organization. What happens when somebody from the outside calls us up and says, hey, I just found this security problem in your product. What do you do? How is that handled? And the developer has a big role in that, because who better than you to determine for me if you have actually, if you can confirm the problem the way that the person tested it and said they found it. And then ultimately you're the one that's going to have to fix it as well. So you've got a part in that, responding to security problems. So if we put this all together, this is kind of, I guess, the stack of how I think of all these things fitting together. You've got the four major responses that developers tend to have when it comes to security. You've got the different kind of transformational things that we can do at a higher level as far as actions, and then the individual behaviors that you want to build up, behaviors and habits that you want to instill into what the developers are doing. So real quick, this is just an idea for if you wanted to take this and you said, hey, I want to do something in my organization. Here's what I would say in the next week. Figure out where you are. Figure out what, survey some of your developers to figure out which of those four categories you're actually working into. And then in the first couple months, pick a security behavior or two and don't try to change everything at the same time. Pick one and just try to instill one along the way. And then as time rolls on, 6 months, a year, you can start to add more security behaviors into your approach. When you start to get some success, you'll start to get a little community that'll form, and then you can start to use that community to help you reach out and connect with other people along the way. So I guess in the key takeaways here, so AppSec or application security, it's a stretch for the average developer out there. We heard 100 different excuses that I've heard throughout my career. We got to break through those. And this is really about changing behavior and not about changing process. So with that, I'd like to hear what questions you have about potentially anything that I said here, or anything application security related, or even perhaps the meaning of life. I'll probably pass that one to somebody else, but what questions you got? Somebody's got to ask a hard one. Yeah, here we go. Good hard question.
In my company, we have had sort of no security concern earlier on, and then it's been increasing importance. And
okay.
I think it's doing well, and we have some more really interested. So I was thinking you were going to mention that in gung-ho, but I think they're more interested in building kingdoms than communities and their own ones.
Okay.
Have you been seeing that?
I haven't seen that, but I could see how that could play out, where somebody would try to take the community idea and then transfer it into, this is my domain now, I'm in charge. Is that what you're saying? So somebody, they're like, we're in charge.
We don't really have a security department, but since there isn't one, someone creates in fact their own security department, and it puts other people off to get interest to engage.
Yeah, no, that's that's certainly a challenge. I mean, I think the only real answer to that is just trying to, like every time we encounter silos, try and figure out how to break it down and try to, if you're not invited to that party, figure out how you're going to get invited, and then you're going to invite more people, so it's not their party anymore, it's everybody else's party. Yeah, that's a tough one though. Yeah. All right, another hard question, or an easy question. I like easy ones better, but.
last slide, I think that security is about behavior and not process. But what do you really mean? Process is also important, you know, and maybe on a higher level than for the developer. I would think that we're sure that this get attention from the organization around it. Or do you have any comments?
Yeah. So when I say the it's true security culture change comes through behavior, not process. I don't mean that process is not important. I truly believe that you have to have a process for how we build secure software, and it has to be very well defined. My point is that if you try to rely on that as how you're going to get developers to change, that's not good. That doesn't cause people to change just because you give them a new process document. Some organizations it might, if it's depending on how much rigor is applied to process in general. But yeah, so I guess my point is that we want to focus on changing the behavior, because if you change the behavior, then people will follow the process because they're doing the right thing for security, which hopefully is what the process is saying they need to do. Yes, sir.
Do you have any tips on what it would take to get a security guy to go from no to no but?
Ooh, that was a hard question. I think. Oh yeah. So how do you get a security person to transform from the no answer to no but? I think here's an idea. Take that security person and pair them with a developer for 6 weeks. Attach them to the developer for 6 weeks, or a week or 2 weeks or whatever it is. Let's see, I have a unique approach to this because I was working with these 25,000 developers at Cisco, and I got to see how they work, I kind of studied them almost like a sociologist does first, and then said, okay, how can we work with them better versus trying to say, I'm from security and this is how we're going to do it. But I only got that because I got that unique view. So yeah, I think if you get that security person to where they understand better what the developer's doing, I think that'll change. One, they might get encouraged to say, oh, there's some fun stuff in designing secure answers when there's a problem. Kind of get that spark to go in their brain. So yeah, that's what I would do. Yes, sir.
About this resistance that the management or organization have against the security. Just as an example, I was working with a project. I told the product manager we should not store username and password in the connection string. The response was, okay, but the code goes to the repository, and if someone has the access to the repo, then we don't care about the connection string. Okay. A week after, I gather a meeting and show everyone with the SQL injection. I delete the whole table in the production server. The response was, first, we don't have that much user. We trust our users. And even if someone do something like that, we have the production server on the Azure. So backup is on.
We'll just restore the backup. Yeah, of course.
So
it's no problem.
Who cares about deleting that one table or all table in the production server?
Yeah.
What is your next move? Because I was okay.
Are you still working? Are you still working at that company?
No.
Okay.
But what is your next move? Because when I'm kind of give up.
You know what I would do? My next move?
Quit.
Update my resume. Because if things are that bad, you're not going to be able to change. That culture is almost, if they haven't, see what I see right now is what's happened in the industry in the last 10 years with all this data breach. Most executives are very focused on they'll call it cybersecurity. Like most boards for major Fortune 500 companies get a cybersecurity briefing from their security teams once a month. So if you had a company that was still having that type of an approach now, I'd say they're probably a lost cause. Because if their board's not pushing down, because cybersecurity is in everything now, that's a culture that you're probably not going to be able to change.
Sort of, it's a bit of an
observation.
Mhm.
So one thing that sort of happened in Norway over the last 8 months is DNB made VIPs, and VIPs had huge security issues.
Okay.
And really early this year, I sort of a group of my friends, we started drinking beer and we started playing around with the app, and we found this rather simple exploit that you could sort of mimic a transfer of money without actually transferring money. The interesting bit was I then spent 2 weeks trying to reach those developers, or there was no security team at DNB or the VIPs organization.
Okay.
The closest thing I got was basically their PR contact,
Oof.
which basically just fed me bullshit, and there was no acknowledgement of it. And of course, 2 months later, it blew up in the media on sort of that people were scamming other people.
Okay.
So I think like a really quintessential thing, at least for a publicly exposed product, is also to have like a proper way for, I would say, advanced users to get in touch and communicate securely security information about your product.
Yeah, totally agree. And what you'll see, most big companies now have something called a PSIRT, your Product Security Incident Response Team. And that is a dedicated group that takes those calls and then triages those type of problems through a process to determine if the vulnerability is correct, and then get a fix and communicate the fix and everything. So yeah, you're right on there. Everybody should have a contact, even if it's just support at your company. It should be on your website for any security issues. Maybe you can have a separate email alias or something, but even if you can't pipe it through support, you want to have a channel for a researcher to be able to come get to you and give you an update.
Yeah, and just also like even basic bounties and such, so that you sort of acknowledge the work that's sort of put into the effort.
Yeah, no, it's not a bad idea and bug bounties is kind of a whole other universe of stuff. But yeah, it doesn't hurt to make if somebody finds a real bug and you get value from it, you should definitely reward them in some way.
That user actually cares about your product.
Yeah.
They want to sort of retain that loyalty.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. So I'm going to wrap up here. Thank you very much, and I'll be around for both days. So if you want to talk more about application security, catch me in the hall. Let's keep talking. Thank you.